All right, guys, today what we're going to be doing is multiplying our decimals, okay? And if you notice, it's not going to be something that's going to be plain and simple as just multiplying these numbers. We do have to have our tenths column, our hundredths column. You're going to see things like that. You are also going to see some words like copies, groups, times, this word of, this is really kind of important. 5 times as much. So you're going to see some of those, and those are going to be what it's going to tell you what you're going to do. So we're going to go ahead and start off on letter A. Sorry guys, have to erase that so you can see the 2. So this is 3 copies of 2 tenths. So I know I'm going to have tenths. So here's what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw. So I have 3 copies. So here's a 2/10, here is a 2/10, and then here is a 2/10, okay? So I've got 3 copies of 2/10, okay? If I were to count this out, I'm gonna have 2/10, 4/10, 6/10. So this is going to be 3 times 2/10 equals 6/10. You can write it in that decimal form as 0.6, or you can write 6/10. All right. Same thing here, I've got 5 groups of 200ths. So I'm going to have 5 groups, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Each of them are going to have 200ths. Okay, and if I were to count this up, I'm going to have that 200ths plus, so basically adding all of these together or multiplying this 5 times. So I've got 200ths, 400ths, 600ths, 800ths, 1000ths. So I actually have 10 hundredths. All right. How am I going to write that in a decimal form? Well, if I go to my place value chart right here, and I were to write 10 hundredths, and remember, oops, I'm sorry guys, remember that 10 hundredths, that hundredths is where that number is going to end, so that 10 hundredths is going to be there. That is actually how I will write that in that decimal form, is a decimal point 10, okay? Because if you were to write it the way you see it here and say, oh, well, I'm going to put the decimal 0 and then 10, that's going to actually be 10 thousandths, okay? So I've got 3 times 6/10. So I'm going to do 3, 1, 2, 3. And if I have 6/10, 6/10, 6/10, well, if I kind of think about this, I've got 6, 12, 18. That's going to be 18/10. Okay, 18/10, writing it in decimal form, is going to be, sorry guys, it's kind of down on the screen here, 18/10. So here's my tenths, has to end with that 8, so it's 1 and 8/10, 1.8. Okay, and I skipped that on letter B, so we're going to kind of go back over here, is that on letter B I need to write this in the equation. So it's going to be 5 times 200ths, okay? Same thing here, I need to write that in the equation, 3 times 6/10. So let's write the equation first, and then we'll go ahead and draw those pictures with those discs. So this is going to be 6 times 400ths, and remember 400ths is going to be written as a decimal point 0.04. Okay, I want to solve what that equals. So it's going to be 6 times. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and each of them are 400ths. Okay, now if I were to look at this, I can think about it and I can count by 4s, or I can say, okay, well, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times 4. Well, that's going to give me 24 hundredths. So if I have 24 hundredths, how do I write that in decimal form? Well, if I come over to my place value chart, and I'm going to write 24, and remember hundredths is where that place value is going to be, I would be writing it as a decimal to 4. Okay. 5 times as much as 7/10. So this is going to be 5 times 7/10. Okay. So I'm going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, because that's how many times I have it. And each of those is going to have 7/10. Now, if you're already kind of thinking, well, if I see that I've got 5 times 7, I know 5 times 7 is 35. So I know this answer is going to be 35/10. Okay. And it is because if I were to count this up, 7, 14, 21, 28, 35. So I have 35/10. If you already know how to write it in decimal form, you don't necessarily need to get your place value chart out. But if I were to write 35/10, remember tenths is going to be where that 5 needs to be. Written in decimal form, it is actually going to be 3.5. Okay. Now I've got 4 thousandths times 3. So I'm going to have 4 thousandths times 3. So this is a little bit backwards because if you look at all the other problems that we've had, it all has that number, well, how many times I'm going to be multiplying it. This is a little bit backwards and it really doesn't matter at all because it's not going to change it, because with the commutative property, if I moved the 3 to this spot and this 400ths to that spot, I'm still going to get the same answer. So I'm going to draw 3 discs because I'm multiplying it 3 times. I'm going to put my 4 thousandths in each of my discs. And if I'm going to go ahead and look at, I've got 4 and 4 and 4, well, if you can also think 4 times 3 would be 12, the answer is going to be 12 thousandths. Okay, well, looking at my place value chart, how to write this in 12 thousandths. Remember, thousandths is where this place value is going to end right here. So I need to write my 12. Do not forget that 0. And actually, to write it in decimal form, it's 0.012. Okay, now down here on number 2, this is another way that we can work out these problems, is that we're just basically going to be separating them out into these models. Okay, so they've already done the first one. So on one side, you're going to have the number that you're multiplying, 7. And then up here is where you want to take that number that has those decimals in it, is you're going to want to kind of split it out and put it into that unit form above this. Then what we can go ahead and do is we can go ahead and solve it. So right now, because I'm taking the 7 times 3 ones, 7 times 3 ones is going to give me 21 ones. Okay, 7 times 1/10 is going to give me 7/10. And instead of writing out 7/10, what you want to do is you want to just write it in that decimal form. And what is 7/10? It would be a decimal point and then 7. Okay, technically you don't need to have this ones here because you know that when you see 21, that is 21 ones. Then what you're going to do is you're going to take these and you're going to add them up. And I'm just going to come over here. And because it goes out to the hundredths column, I'm going to go ahead and already have those 2 zeros after my 21 so that when I line this up, it lines up nice and pretty. So then I can add this up. 0 plus 0 is 4. 0 plus 7 plus 1 is 8. That decimal just traces back down. And then 1 plus 0 is 1. 2 plus 0s is 2. The answer is 21 and 84 hundredths. Okay, we're going to do the same thing on this one. So you want to make your rectangular model right here. I have those 3 place values, so I'm just going to make it into 3. This number, because that's what I'm going to be multiplying it by, is going to be 6. And then up here, I'm going to say, how many ones do I have? Well, I have 4 ones. How many tenths do I have? I have 2 tenths. And then how many hundredths do I have? I have 5 hundredths. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and put in here 6 times 4 ones, 6 times 2 tenths, and then 6 times 5 hundredths. Okay, 6 times 4, you know, is 24. Okay, I'm going to add 6 times 2 is going to be 12. So I have 12 tenths. And don't just think that you guys can write it as a decimal point 1, 2. That is not the fact. So if I were to have 12 tenths, remember tenths is where that 2 needs to end. So 12 tenths actually looks like that. So I'm going to go ahead and put this on my place value right here. And then 6 times 5 is 30, so I have 30 hundredths. So if I were to do the same thing, 30 hundredths, hundredths is where that 0 needs to be, 30 hundredths would be written like that. Okay, so do this, and then I'm going to take these numbers, and of course, because it was 2 decimal points, I'm just going to turn that, and I'll do it right here, 24, and I'm going to add those 2 zeros after that, because remember, adding those zeros after the decimal does not change the number. I'm going to put 1 and 2 tenths, but I'm going to add that 0, and then I'm going to make sure that I put that 30 hundredths, add it up, 0, 5, decimal point, 4 plus 1 is 5. So this answer is going to be 25 and 50 hundredths. Okay, we're going to come back and do the back side of the paper.